Asian cinema and horror have, historically, gone hand in hand. Chances are some of your first Asian film experiences were horrors, from classics like Ringu and Ju-on the Grudge to modern-day masterpieces like Train to Busan and The Wailing. Eastern filmmakers have a habit of crushing the West with how good their horror films are. But what do you do once you've seen Sadako fight Kayako and the 10th of 3 VI films? For all the greats out there, there's also a slew of pretty tragically bad movies that need to be avoided. So, to save you some time, here are 5 great Asian horrors you might have missed. If you're fans of horror, you've probably seen the absolute worst of the found footage genre, slogging as you have through hours of shaky cam, awful acting, and jump scares that feel completely unearned. But what if I told you that there's one film buried deep in Japan's horror landscape that perfected the format? Released in 2005, Noroi: The Curse had every chance to be a terrible Blair Witch knockoff. It follows paranormal investigator Masafune Kobayashi, played by Jin Muraki, who vanishes while completing his final spooky documentary. The premise sounds worn and tired, but Noroi is actually one of the best found footage films ever made. Found footage is a genre that relies on verisimilitude, and Noroi has plenty of it. While other movies in the genre rely solely on a single handheld camera or a few scattered bits of security footage, Noroi uses a brilliant array of media to sell its reality. Director Koji Shiraishi weaves together footage from Kobayashi's documentary with actual news reports and clips from Japanese variety TV shows. These scenes, accurately rendered to look just as they do on TV, blur the line between fiction and reality so effectively you half expect Downtown to spend a segment of Wednesdays investigating whether it's true. It doesn't just feel like a movie, it feels like a real-life deep dive into a conspiracy that's unfolding right now across the entire country. This varied visual approach keeps the world believable and the story interesting, locking you into the mystery from the very first minute. The horror is built on slow, deliberate burn that is absolutely drenched in dread. The director allows the unsettling moments to filter in organically, focusing on the creepy goings-on rather than trying to have the spooky things happen directly at the camera. We aren't terrified by a sudden noise, we are chilled instead by the slow realization that every single plot point, the strange sounds, the odd behaviors, the dead pigeons, are all converging into one massive ancient curse. While some horror movies fall apart when they try to explain the monster, Noroi keeps its secrets. Even when the truth of the curse is revealed to the audience, the characters themselves remain frustratingly in the dark. This lack of resolution perfectly captures the feeling of being overwhelmed by a supernatural evil that is simply too vast and too ancient to be contained or understood by human logic. The slow build-up and its ultimate ambiguity make it one of the finest in the found footage genre, and one that many auteurs and amateur filmmakers should learn from. War is hell. Arguably, there is nothing scarier than a war. Except, perhaps, a ghost story in a war. When we talk about military horror, movies usually fall into one of two traps. They can spend their runtime politicizing and making too heavy-handed a point, or they throw some soldiers in with some zombies and let the guns do all the work. But that is not the case with the 2004 Korean horror Our Point. Our Point takes the established horrors of the Vietnam War and blends them with suffocating supernatural terror. It's a film about the literal ghosts of war, yes, but more importantly, it's about the psychological demons that soldiers carry with them. The setup is simple. A South Korean base in Vietnam receives a strange radio transmission from a platoon that has been missing and presumed dead for 6 months. Decorated Lieutenant Choi Tae-in and 8 men are dispatched to a rendezvous point to investigate this impossible signal. With such a premise, it's natural that the tension starts to build, though not from external threats, but rather from within the squad. During the mission, the characters start experiencing supernatural phenomena, but with paranoia fully setting in, the turning point comes when they begin to turn on themselves. Our Point uses the isolation inherent in the mission as a psychological pressure cooker. Every unexplained sound, every vanishing man, and every failed communication is viewed through a suspicious lens. It's less the ghosts, and more this internal conflict that makes Our Point so engaging and so scary. Our Point understands that a soldier's greatest enemy isn't the ghost in the periphery, it's the erosion of trust in the man holding the rifle next to him. Horror films often ruin their own premise by explaining too much in the final act. We get the big reveal, the monster's backstory, and suddenly the chilling mystery becomes predictable exposition. Our Point refuses to fall into this trap. Even as the film hurtles towards its violent, chaotic climax, the soldiers and the audience are never given a clear, definitive explanation for what is happening. The film leaves just enough in the air to suggest that the Our Point itself is cursed, a place where the pervasive violence and trauma of war have permanently imprinted themselves. This sustained ambiguity prevents the film from becoming a simple puzzle to solve, and ensures that the emotional terror, the unsettling idea that some wounds can never be explained or healed, lingers long after the screen goes black. Our point does not reinvent the wheel, but it is proof that you don't need fresh techniques or radically new story beats to make great horror. You just need a director who understands how to mount the tension and how to effectively blend performances with a stressed atmosphere. The result is a genuinely chilling, nail-biting experience that never feels sluggish and gets you right where you need to be at the rendezvous point of terror. We've all no doubt suffered bad neighbours, frequent parties, wild lawns, or, in the case of my upstairs neighbours during lockdown, daily rehearsals of Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah on piano. But what if instead of borrowing and never returning your cake tins, the polite but awkward guy next door was actually the subject of a cold case murder investigation? That's the premise behind 2016's Creepy. The film follows former criminal profiler Koichi and his wife Yasuko as they move to the countryside, where they meet the undeniably creepy neighbour Nishino. While Koichi is immediately unsettled, his wife tries to be friendly, but soon Koichi is asked to consult on an old missing persons case, a case which seems to intersect with their unsettling neighbour. For a good portion of its 130-minute runtime, Creepy runs two separate, equally tense stories in parallel. On the one side, there's Koichi, helping his former colleague with the cold case, the disappearance of an entire family 6 years prior, leaving behind only one traumatized daughter. The storyline is pure, moody detective work, reminiscent of films like Seven. On the other side, you have the domestic drama, Yasuko trying to befriend Nishino. Hitchcock once said that tension comes best when the audience knows something the characters don't, and seeing both sides of the story unfold allows for maximum dread. The brilliance here is how these two plots inevitably connect. You know they're related, it would be a wild cinematic choice if they weren't, but watching the pieces slowly come together is the film's masterstroke. It's like watching two trains slowly move towards a catastrophic collision, and you can't look away. But where Creepy is strongest is with Teruyuki Kagawa's portrayal of Nishino. He is the heart of the film's unease. Because the movie is literally called Creepy, Kagawa's challenge is immense. He's already labelled as sinister from his first appearance, and so it's to his credit that his performance is constantly making the audience doubt themselves for perhaps judging him too early. Kagawa's nuanced acting drives the central tension, forcing Yasuko and us to question, is he just eccentric, or is he actually dangerous? His performance allows the psychological horror to thrive, proving that a chilling villain doesn't need theatrical monologues. Sometimes all they need is an uncomfortably long stare. Sure, the film is long, especially for a slow burn like this. Creepy, however, earns every minute. Kiyoshi Kurosawa, a master of unease, crafts this upsettingly toxic atmosphere, and it permeates throughout the entire movie. The grey scenery, the dilapidated buildings, and the slow unfolding of the plot all combine to create a sustained feeling of dread. Creepy is a film that will have you doubting your neighbours even more. It might be best not to press them about that cake tin. Imagine being afraid of your own thoughts. Afraid to read the wrong book. Afraid of the person sitting next to you. This was the reality of the White Terror, a brutal 38-year period of martial law in Taiwan. And this political nightmare is the setting for one of the most unique and visually arresting horror films in recent memory, 2019's Detention. Adapted from a popular video game of all things, Detention is no typical ghost story. Its main weapon is real-world history, using the supernatural as a metaphor for trauma, censorship, and political oppression. It is equal parts nightmarish survival horror and tense political drama. Set in a high school in the 1960s, two students, Fang and Wei, wake up alone to find their school transformed into a sinister, dilapidated hellscape. The real context here is the banned book study group they were both a part of, led by their teacher Mr. Chang. This is where the film's political roots run deep. The school, often seen as a place of learning and safety, becomes a suffocating microcosm of the entire country under martial law. The study group's secret acts of literary rebellion carry a death sentence. Through frequent flashbacks, we see the dramatic stakes, students and teachers risking everything to fight back against the dictatorship. And this constant switch between the present-day nightmare and the past political thriller not only fleshes out the story, but makes the horror feel terrifyingly real. When the lights go out, the ghost you're running from isn't just a monster, it's the physical embodiment of the state's oppressive power. This is bolstered thanks to a style that will be familiar to Resident Evil fans everywhere, the survival horror setting. The characters here are unarmed, vulnerable, and guided only by a flickering candle. The high stakes and draining atmosphere makes every threat feel imminent. Visually, the film delivers indelible, awesome imagery. The red-lit assembly hall or the chilling introduction of the military police demons are as unpleasant as they are unsubtle. In Detention, the horror is symbolic, and it's not coy about it either. The demons, the labyrinthine school, and the constant sense of danger are all stand-ins for the paralyzing effects of censorship and surveillance. But, most impressively, it's a video game adaptation that's actually incredibly good. The key is pacing. Though the habit of switching between nightmarish hellscape and political drama could easily cause tonal whiplash, they do keep a lot of the mood of the film balanced. The historical flashbacks don't interrupt the horror, they fuel it, giving the viewer the meat necessary to understand why these characters are so scared and so scarred. If you imagine 1984's Thought Police was bad, just wait until you meet the Thought Demons. So far, we've seen the horror inherent in war, in political tyranny, in strangers who live too close, and in unknown rural places. But we've yet to look at internal horrors, ones that reside deep within us and come out to the surface when we expose ourselves creatively. And nowhere is that feeling more raw and more true than in the theatre, as seen in Takashi Miike's Over Your Dead Body. The film tells of a theatrical troupe performing Yotsuya Kaidan, Japan's most famous ghost story, one of betrayal and brutal revenge. But as the play unfolds, the lines between the stage and real life begin to collapse. The actors find themselves living up the same tragic betrayals as their characters, blurring the edge between performance and horrifying reality. Despite being a film by V-cinema auteur and schlockmonger Takashi Miike, the film is shockingly restrained, a choice that works effectively well in its favour. This is Miike operating with surgical precision, delivering psychological horror over gore, and it all starts with its source material. Yotsuya Kaidan is the quintessential Japanese revenge tragedy, and centers on Iemon, not Lemon as it might look on screen, a samurai who betrays and poisons his wife Oiwa, who in turn returns as a disfigured ghost to haunt him. In Miike's film, the actors playing Iemon and Oiwa, named Kosuke and Miyuki, are themselves entangled in a toxic, failing romance off stage, and you can imagine how things will escalate from there. Kosuke is having an affair with the actress playing the mistress, and as life imitates art imitates life, Kosuke's real-life betrayal begins to mirror Iemon's classic treachery. In classic Kaufman-esque style, the play within the film becomes the fatal script that the actors are forced to follow, with devastating consequences that feel predestined. It feels very easy for this to have been a brutal, violent mess in Miike's usual style. The film does follow a different path with its deliberately slow burn. The director avoids cheap jump scares and focuses instead on uncomfortable repetition and an escalating psychological breakdown between its key players. The film's tragic figure is Miyuki, and we see every step of her mind unraveling and how her character begins to consume her. In an exercise straight out of TMZ, we, the audience, are made to watch the mundane yet toxic details of the actors' lives, the petty jealousies, the quiet cruelties, and the feeling of being trapped. When the horrific climax finally arrives, it hits with far more impact because Miike has spent over an hour meticulously setting the stage for emotional and physical collapse. The film gives a few hints that the characters might be being haunted by their own roles, but it's never really fully made clear. The boundary between rehearsal and reality vanishes, making it impossible to tell if the horrors are supernatural revenge or pure psychogenic madness. This commitment to the psychological realm makes Over Your Dead Body an enduring and chilling warning against the dangers of method acting. And that's the list! If you have any thoughts about the films I mentioned, please leave them in the comments below. And if you have other recommendations for lesser watched Asian horrors, let me know, and I'll make another video. You can read more about the films I mentioned on my website, theasiancinemacritic.com. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.